Georgia, 1839. In the dense marshlands outside Savannah, records whisper of a plantation lady whose name the town dared not speak aloud. They say she vanished one summer night, leaving behind only the stench of salt water and blood. But in her absence came questions. Why were the quarters abandoned overnight? Why did the church bells toll for no funeral? And why, nearly 2 centuries later, does her story still cling like a disease to this land? Tonight, we unearth the secret of the woman who bathed naked with her slaves, a ritual of power, flesh, and corruption. What began as vanity became a sickness the town could not contain. The Ashwood Plantation, built in 1823, stood like a fortress against the swamps. Its mistress, Eleanor Ashwood, inherited the estate after her husband's sudden death. While most widows retreated into mourning, Eleanor ruled with a presence that unsettled both slaves and neighbors alike. Her mornings began not in the chapel, but in the bathhouse by the river. There, beneath rotting beams and flickering lanterns, she demanded the company of her strongest male slaves. Witnesses spoke of a silence in those rooms. No splashing, no laughter. Only Eleanor's breath echoing against the stone, her skin pale against the black water. To the church, she claimed it was a purification ritual. To her neighbors, she said nothing at all. But the slaves whispered another story, one of hunger, of blood, of something that moved beneath the water, touching her body as though the river itself had chosen her. By 1839, deaths had begun. Young men, stripped of strength, found lifeless by dawn. And yet no one dared to accuse her. The town of Bridgemore lived under the weight of 2 masters, the plantation economy and the church. Both had reasons to stay silent. The church feared scandal. If word spread that a white mistress was desecrating purity with enslaved men, their sermons would crumble into dust. The plantation owners feared collapse. If Eleanor's rituals were exposed, whispers of rebellion would ignite. And so the townspeople closed their eyes. Children were told to avoid the river at night. The slaves, bound by chains and fear, prayed to gods older than the Bible for deliverance. And yet, Eleanor's hunger deepened. There are fragments of testimonies, hidden court papers, half-burned letters, that suggest the truth. That her bathing was no cleansing, but an invocation. That in the rising steam of the bathhouse, she was calling something forth. And the deeper the town buried her secret, the stronger it became. The bathhouse was not a luxury, but a prison of ritual. Built of brick hauled by enslaved hands, it stood apart from the manor, hidden by reeds and cypress. Its air smelled of mildew and rusted iron. Inside, the water was drawn from the river, heavy with silt and strange mineral taste. Slaves testified, though only in whispers, that the mistress would stand naked in the center, her white flesh gleaming like ivory, commanding the strongest men to surround her. They said she touched them not as a woman, but as a priestess, muttering in tongues older than any sermon. Her eyes fixed on the water's surface, as though something below was listening. What terrified them most was her endurance. While the men shook from exhaustion, she lingered for hours in the dark pool, smiling faintly, as if each ritual fed her with something unseen. Neighbors dismissed the rumors as vulgar lies, but diaries uncovered a century later described something more. A sound like a heartbeat beneath the river, louder each year she bathed. Among the enslaved, stories became their only weapon. Mothers whispered to children not to look at the bathhouse windows. Fathers warned their sons never to accept the mistress's summons, though refusal meant the whip. They called her the Bride of the River. Some claimed she was possessed by the spirit of a drowned woman, others that she was offering the men's bodies to an ancient force that dwelled beneath. One chilling detail repeated. After each ritual, Eleanor's skin appeared younger, her cheeks flushed with unnatural color. The men she chose grew gaunt, their eyes hollow, as though something had been drained. Yet still no one dared to intervene. For the slaves, to speak too loudly was death. For the townsfolk, to accuse a white mistress was unthinkable. And so, the silence thickened. But silence has weight, and weight eventually cracks. By the spring of 1839, 3 men had vanished. Their bodies surfaced days later, tangled in reeds, their faces pale, eyes wide open as if they had seen something unspeakable in their final moments. The coroner ruled it drowning, but the bodies told another story. No bruises, no broken bones, only a strange discoloration across the chest, as if their hearts had been burned from within. Eleonora held a service at the chapel, her veil black, her lips still red. Witnesses claimed she did not shed a single tear. Instead, she placed her hands on the pulpit and told the congregation, "Some are chosen to return to the water. Do not question the river's will." From that day, fear coiled itself around Bridgemore like smoke. Children woke screaming at night. Dogs refused to go near the bathhouse. And the church elders began locking the chapel doors after sunset. The ministers of Bridgemore faced a choice: confront the mistress or shield her behind scripture. They chose the latter. Rumors tell that the reverend was seen entering Ashwood late at night, carrying holy water that was never used in baptism. Some believe he tried to sanctify her rituals, convincing himself he was protecting the town from worse evils. Others suggest he was seduced by power, by fear, by her beauty that seemed untouched by age. But every time he stood at the pulpit, preaching of sin and salvation, the congregation saw his eyes falter when he spoke of purity. They saw sweat on his brow, his trembling hand upon the Bible. It was not faith that kept the church silent. It was complicity, for to expose her would be to expose themselves. In 1847, nearly a decade after Eleanor's disappearance, fragments of testimony surfaced from a surviving orphan of Bridgemore. His words, though scattered, bleed terror onto the page. She came to the quarters at night. She touched their faces as if choosing meat. I saw her once, her body pale, glowing in the dark, the men afraid to move. When she saw me, she only smiled and said, "The river keeps what it wants." The boy's account never made it into official records. Instead, the document was tucked away in a church archive, buried among endless rosters of baptisms and funerals. But its handwriting still trembles with fear. Children saw what adults refused to, and children, unlike adults, cannot always keep secrets. By summer of 1839, the whispers became too loud. Farmers muttered in the tavern. Wives gossiped in the market. Why were so many men gone? Why did no lawman ask questions? Some townsfolk began to see Eleonora as cursed, a witch sent to punish Bridgemore. Others defended her fiercely, calling her a victim of vile rumors from the enslaved. The divide cut deep. Friends refused to speak. Families splintered. At night, people swore they saw figures moving by the river. Men walking stiffly, heads bowed low, as if bound to an invisible chain. Fear was no longer private. It was public. It was political. And in every pew, every supper table, the question pulsed like a hidden infection. How long can we keep this secret? The enslaved could not wait for mercy. They began to meet in secret beneath the moss-draped oaks, calling on spirits from Africa, blending their old gods with the hymns forced upon them. They carved symbols into the bathhouse walls, wards against the thing they believed she summoned. They left offerings by the riverbank, bones, feathers, ash, hoping to appease whatever stirred beneath the water. But there were also plans whispered of fire. If the mistress would not release them, if the church would not save them, they would burn the bathhouse down and salt the earth where it stood. Only, they never did. Records hint at patrols, punishments, whippings so severe that rebellion suffocated before it could spark. And yet, each night the prayers grew louder. Something was rising. That autumn, Eleonora hosted a feast for the wealthiest families of Bridgemore. By then, she had grown unervingly beautiful, her face ageless, her figure untouched by years. Guests remarked that she looked like a bride, not a widow. But as the night wore on, the servants noticed a change. The candles dimmed without wind. The air thickened. Some claimed they smelled brine, as though the sea itself had entered the dining hall. One guest later wrote in a diary that Eleonora lifted her glass of wine and whispered something that silenced the entire room. To the river who takes and gives back. That was the last feast many of those families ever attended. Within weeks, sickness spread. An illness that caused violent coughing, blackened gums, and sudden collapse. Entire households vanished. The church called it plague. But the river had no name for it. Hidden for over a century, the journal of Reverend Thomas Cole was found in the false bottom of a pulpit. His words reek of dread. I tried to sanctify her, but the water turned my blessings to rot. She is not alone in that bathhouse. I have seen the ripples when her body is still. Something rises to her, something I dare not name. I cannot abandon her. If she falls, we all fall. God forgive me, but I will keep her secret until the grave. Cole's journal breaks off abruptly. No entry after November 1839. His grave marker, empty. His body, never found. The church sealed the pulpit and nailed it shut. For nearly 200 years, no one dared open it again. It began with sightings at midnight. Townsfolk swore they saw men walking into the water. Barefoot, silent, eyes blank. They did not return. Some claimed they were the dead slaves, called back from the river to serve her even after death. Others whispered they were townsmen, drawn by a summons they could not resist. The procession left no footprints, only ripples on the surface, as if the river itself had swallowed them whole. Days later, widows found their husbands gone. Mothers woke to empty cradles. And each time, the bathhouse door stood open, steam rising from within. At last, Bridgemore broke. A band of men, both slaves and poor farmers, marched on Ashwood with fire. They doused the bathhouse in oil, lit the torches, and hurled them onto the roof. But the fire would not take. Witnesses swore the flames bent backward, devoured by the wet air. The walls sweated with condensation, dripping like blood. One man, desperate, forced the door open. What he saw drove him to madness. Eleanora submerged to her neck, eyes closed, smiling. And around her, shapes. Not men, not fish. Something in between. Limbs too long, mouths opening and closing soundlessly, swaying to a rhythm older than human breath. The man ran screaming into the swamp. His body was found days later, throat torn open as if by unseen teeth. Ashwood remained unburned, and the bathhouse still stood. By winter, Bridgemore was dying. The fever spread faster than burial teams could dig graves. Families sealed themselves indoors, but the sickness seeped through walls like smoke. Doctors blamed the river. The church blamed sin. But the slaves whispered that Eleanora was feeding, that the more men wasted away, the more radiant she became. Witnesses described her walking through the town at dusk, untouched by illness, her white dress trailing through the mud, her eyes unblinking. Children wept at the sight. Dogs howled and then fell silent, as though their throats had been cut. No one dared confront her. Not anymore. Fear had become worship. Among the few survivors was Clara Ashwood, Eleanora's niece, sent to live with her after her parents' deaths. Clara's diary reveals the horror within the house. She does not eat. She does not sleep. At night, she slips from her bed and walks to the river. I followed once. She stood in the water until dawn, whispering names I did not know. When she returned, her hands dripped red. But she smiled at me as though she were still my aunt. I think she loves me. I think she will not let me leave. Clara's handwriting ends abruptly. The last entry is smudged with something darker than ink. No grave for Clara Ashwood was ever recorded. In the last days of 1839, a handful of townsfolk and slaves gathered to end Eleanora's reign. They brought ropes, crosses, knives. Anything they believed could cut her tie to the river. But when they reached the bathhouse, they found the doors already open. Steam poured into the night, and inside the pool was boiling. Witnesses claimed they saw Eleanora standing naked in the center, her arms raised, her body glowing faintly. Around her, the shadows twisted, forming shapes that swam upward through the water. One survivor wrote in a letter never mailed. She was not praying to them. She was welcoming them. And they came, like children returning to their mother. The group fled in terror. By morning, Ashwood Plantation was silent. Eleanora Ashwood was never seen again. The manor stood for months, empty, until vines and floodwater devoured it. The bathhouse sank slowly into the riverbank, its roof collapsing inward like a grave. No body was ever found. No funeral was held. The church declared her name unspeakable, erasing it from sermons, records, and stone. Yet in every home the story lingered. Children whispered of the Lady of the River. Hunters claimed to hear laughter across the water at dawn. And those who walked the banks at night swore they saw a pale figure, waist deep in the current, beckoning. The silence of Bridgemore was complete. But silence is not absence. Silence is containment. Nearly 2 centuries later, fragments of this forgotten horror resurfaced. Burned letters, missing church records, bones unearthed by floodwaters. Local archives show deliberate destruction of documents from 1839. Parish books torn. Court cases missing. It was not ignorance, it was erasure. A town-wide conspiracy to bury Eleanora and her legacy. But the earth does not forget what men try to silence. Archaeologists uncovered shackles fused with stone, as if melted by unnatural heat. In the ruins of the bathhouse, symbols carved by enslaved hands remain sharp, resisting weather and time. And in the basement of the old Bridgemore Chapel, long abandoned, scholars found Reverend Cole's final words etched into wood. The river has no end, nor does she. Even now, locals avoid the river after dark. Fishermen refuse to cast nets near the old plantation site. And every few years a disappearance is reported. A swimmer, a child, a drifter vanishing without a trace. Those who live nearby speak of dreams. Dreams of a pale woman bathing, her body lit by moonlight, her lips moving soundlessly. When they wake, their sheets are damp, their skin cold as though pulled from water. Is it superstition, or the echo of a truth buried too deep? History tells us Eleanora Ashwood vanished in 1839, but legend says she never left. The river still holds her secret, and if you listen, it will call your name too. Fade to black. Sound of water dripping. A single laugh, distant, hollow, lingers until silence.